Jim, it seems like all of the issues that we've been dealing with, if they're working perfectly, and in all of my consulting, we get them going just right, and then many times we find out that the product that's being shipped to the company is what keeps messing things up, and people feel like that's out of their control. How does that fit into the whole continuous improvement process?
I think there's an attitude that we have to develop, and the attitude is we really got to develop a partnership feeling with our suppliers. What we've had is a relationship that's been a negative one. We've talked to them, you've got to stop shipping us bad product. You're getting in our way. You're holding us up. You're taking us down dead ends. We haven't really developed a partnership. What we've expected them to do is to yield their systems to our way of life. Because we're the customer, we've expected them to adapt to us continuously. We really haven't went to them and said, what's the best way for us to work? How can we develop a win-win situation? And that's what we want to do. True partnerships where both parties are going to benefit from the whole interface with each other. When you start to think about it, if you consider that it's your employees that are your most valuable asset, your suppliers run an awful close second, don't they? And what we want to do is to develop this new partnership arrangement where both parties are willing to go more than 50%. They both got to go 60% to make it work. And that's the same thing in marriage. Both partners have to go more than that halfway point. And to do that, there's a whole series of activities that takes place and to build that partnership. And we're seeing this develop throughout the world at the present time. We're looking at the bigger companies, the people that are buying the product, going back to the suppliers and helping them develop an education system, getting them attuned to the quality activities that they should be involved in, and involving them in how their product is being used at the final location. They're involving them in design reviews. They take the supplier in when we're actually putting together the basic design and we say, we want to use your product, we want to use it correctly. Now, who knows the most about a serval? Is it the person that's going to use it, or is it the person that's going to build it? Certainly it's the person that's going to build it. They have the expertise. Why not call upon that expertise to help you apply that servo in that location, in that individual activity?
You've got to almost take the supplier on as part of your organization. It's part of the team. That's why we're here in the team environment still talking about suppliers, isn't it?
Absolutely. We've got to put them on our team, working with them. So often what we've said is, we pay them with good money, we expect 100% good parts. We don't even try to appreciate their problems, and most of their problems is us. We give them bad specifications, we misapply their products, and then we come back and we yell at them and they're just defenseless against us. We've got to really develop that partnership, that team between us. Got to involve them early into the cycle so that they get involved in how they're applying their products. You have to provide them good feedback, not just feedback from receiving inspection, but how their product is performing in the field, in your actual operations with your customer. You've got to talk about things like long-term contracts so that they can actually build up their production facilities, bring in new equipment to meet your needs. And you've got to do something to involve them in the whole profit motive. Incentive programs are becoming very, very popular, where we provide some sharing of the rewards that we receive financially back to the suppliers that do good work for us.
Because if they're shipping us stuff that we don't have to inspect and that it works right the first time, and we don't have to redo it so that it fits into our system, that's a big, that goes right to the bottom line for us as well, doesn't it?
Yes. And it's absolutely surprising how much we depend upon suppliers. I'd like to stop our team meeting just for a minute and allow you to spend a little time to make a list of all the things that are supplied to you from outside, things that you need within your organization, within your company, that are not produced within your company. It's amazing the amount of things we buy, isn't it? Some of the things you never even think about. The lights, the power, the telephones. Some things that you have no control over. Some things that there's a single source that you've got to deal with. But many of the things that you prepared on your list are things that you have an option, things that you can select the supplier, things that you can work with the supplier to ensure that they're going to provide you product that's going to meet your expectations and be the advantage, the competitive advantage that you have in moving out to sell your product to your customer. What you really need to do is get your suppliers involved in what you're trying to accomplish. Make them feel that they want to satisfy not only you, but they want to satisfy their customer and your customer so that it's all brought together into profit for both of you. A true profit partnership between the two areas. We need to develop a strong team relationship with common goals so that we're both working for the same end objectives. Now, when we start thinking about what's happening in manufacturing areas, you think about robotics, and you think about just-in-time. And what's required is a completely uplift in all of our supplier activities. When you look at robotics, we find continuously that you really need better quality products, not less quality products. You think robotics is going to solve your problems. Well, robotics don't think. People are amazing. You know, they can adjust. If there's something missing, they know it and they put it away. The robotics just stick it in there. And so the quality of your supplier products have to be far superior if you're using robotics than as though you're using people because of adaptability. The other thing that we're seeing coming into most companies is just in time. Product that comes in the door and goes into your product immediately. The components transform from the box right into the production floor. There's no stock, nothing in between. We're eliminating that whole just-in-case stock. So what does that mean? You cannot have bad products reach your door. You cannot rely on receiving inspection to reject things back to the supplier. So the whole requirements in today's environment is a whole new attitude. It's an attitude that we've got to have, not percent defective, but parts per million coming from all of our suppliers, and eventually in the 1990s, we're going to be talking parts per billion as being commonplace. Now, what we did is we really telegraphed to our suppliers the wrong message. We'd go to our suppliers, and they'd send us in products. We'd come to receiving inspection. They'd sit there, and they'd inspect the product. They'd look at it. They'd look at behind it and underneath it, and they'd look at it under a magnifying glass. They say, there's something wrong. We're going to reject this whole thing back. They reject it over here. Down comes the engineer. The engineer picks it up, and he says, well, really, that's not that bad. Let's use them. We need them in production. The line's going to shut down if we don't use these parts. Let's use them anyway. I'll off-spec them. What are we telling our suppliers? our specs don't mean anything. And so what they do is they say, well, maybe the company can use it anyway. So we know it's a little bit bad, but let's ship it and see what happens. And that was the attitude of the 70s. Pretty much that rolled over into the attitude of the 80s. And that was the problem with receiving inspection. Receiving inspection was really a bad idea. Receiving inspection, first of all, does not ensure 100% good parts, because inspection, even if it's 100%, will not give you 100% good parts because there's operator fatigue. So you've got to have some other way of ensuring that you're getting quality parts coming in. We're working in a parts per million type environment, which means you cannot sample anymore. So the receiving inspection becomes ineffective. You're looking at the huge delay in receiving inspection because the parts are waiting in queue to come on through, and huge amounts of money that's tied up with that whole receiving inspection operation. Delays that we cannot stand. Cost, huge departments. I know departments in big companies in the receiving inspection area that are 100 people sitting there doing checks and balances on somebody else that they shouldn't have to do. And what happens half the time, they make an error too. They reject something that shouldn't be rejected. You send it back to the supplier and you're embarrassed because it's really right anyway. So that whole combination says receiving inspection's a bad idea and we've got to do something about it. We've got to move out of that mode of keeping product out. We've got to ensure that when it comes to our back door, instead of putting up our hands and stopping it, we're saying, come on in, we're ready for you. It's good. Now,
it's a real shift, Jim, because it seems like we're creating an internal organization to do our suppliers' jobs, simply because we don't have that partnership and that relationship and understanding.
And because we haven't worked with them. We haven't worked with them. And it's not a team. It's an adversarial relationship. We're going to prove you're wrong. Inspectors get their highs out of finding a reject. That's what they get paid for. It's hard for them to think that it's a good thing to say this is a good lot. When they're successful, they find something wrong and they reject it. Now that's their motivation, so it's a negative motivation. And what we need to do is to really look at our whole supplier base. We have to be very selective. Most companies have too many suppliers. They've got a wide range of suppliers for every part. They've set aside 3, maybe 4 suppliers that can supply that part into the company. And as a result, we've got all of these people to worry about. We've got to worry about all of their processes, all of their people. And when we place an order, and it goes to 25% here, 25% here, 25% here, and 25% here. What happens, no one can really afford to build up a manufacturing process that's going to give you the best product. And what you do is we've got to cut back and select a supplier and start working with that supplier and build up that partnership and get rid of the other suppliers.
So then what we can do... So that who wins the business is the highest quality provider all the time.
Absolutely. Now what happens once we got rid of the others and we're requiring this person to produce 100% of the product, now he can afford to invest in education for his people, automation of his equipment, hard tooling of his equipment. All of these good things that he can do now ends up to providing you with higher quality product at lower cost. So what happens, you normally think that the advantage of multiple suppliers is a cost advantage, because now I can get these two people fighting with one another. And when we start fighting with one another, we feel that, oh, we're going to drive down costs. Well, when you drive down costs, you drive down quality.
Well, the other thing they do is make false promises. Oh, we'll get it right to you, and we'll do it cheaper and quicker and faster and better, which isn't the case.
No, there's certainly some advantages to multi-suppliers. When you're talking about, you got a backup in case something goes wrong. You have somebody else that can provide you with additional stock. You're less dependent on an individual supplier. There's probably less legal risk in that case. But the advantages far outweigh the disadvantages in working with that supplier. Because when you're working with 4 suppliers, you're truly not just increasing your work factor by 1, but a factor of 4. You got to spend 4 times the amount of your effort with your procurement quality engineers out there with the suppliers, and that just doesn't pay off in the long run. We have found that you can build a high level of trust, you can get better tools at your suppliers, you will reduce costs in the long run by working with a fewer supplier base. Now, most of the big companies have talked about major reductions. I've seen supplier bases that have been dropped by as much as 75%. So we can focus on building these partnerships, this true partnership between each other. And that's what we've got to do. Long-term contracts turned out to be the next major activity that we got to think about. You know, when we provide our supplier with an order for 100 pieces, what does he do? He says, I got to build up for that 100 pieces. I'm not going to invest in training. I'm not going to invest in tooling. But when you say, I want 100 pieces a month for the next 15 months, now you can say, hey, I can afford to invest. I'm going to go back and tune that design. I can give them a little bit better product. We can do things here and working together. So what you want to do is to really select a supplier and talk about what the job is, what we're talking about giving you over a long period of time. Minimum of a year. What do we see happening in a year? And probably some projections of what we see is going to happen in the next 2 and 3 years. This provides huge advantages because now the person can select employees that are permanent. They don't have that transient turnover, moving from your job to some other job and back and forth. They can look at the flow into your process and run the flow so that it just meets your requirements. So we don't have large stocks and large inventories. So often when they talk just in time, what happens, the big company says, I don't want any inventory, but they expect the supplier to have the inventory, so when they submit an order, he can immediately send it to them. Well, that doesn't save the U.S., any money. You know, who do you think pays for the stock at your suppliers?
Well, ultimately, I end up paying for it.
Right. It all comes out in the price of the product. So you're just fooling yourself when you say, I'm not going to have any stock, let the supplier have the stock. We've really got to have both parties working together, understanding what's going to happen over the long term, and develop a production schedule that meets that long-term requirement. That really cements the partnership between the two of you when you can trust each other and actually share information of what's going to happen in the future. Now, we had 4 suppliers here, all working together, competing. Now, what are you going to do? You know, which one's the right one to work with? Well, I think that's one of the problems that we really got to face when we decide that we're going to look at suppliers. And you've got 4 potential suppliers here, all of them supposedly capable of producing a product that is very, very good for you. Now what you need to do is to look at those suppliers and determine which one is the right one for you to work with. And that's called supplier surveys. Very important part. Probably the most important thing you will do in your whole activity in supplier bases is selecting the right supplier, because you're making a long-term financial commitment to that supplier for him to help him improve, to work with him to develop his products. So let's be very careful when we select suppliers. Let's not just look at what is the lowest price. There's a lot of other things. We find continuously that the lowest price frequently is the most costly. And what we need to do is to look at not purchase price, but price to deliver that product to your customer. Lifetime cycle cost, what we're going to call that, and that's what we need to look at. So when we start talking about suppliers, we have to do a very detailed survey. You should start by soliciting candidates. Can you make my product? And then do a mail survey that follows up with coming into their company and truly evaluating their financial systems to ensure that they're financially secure. Look at what their labor relation contracts are and what's happened as far as strikes, as far as turnover of people. Look at their quality control systems, the basic system itself. Will it ensure control? Because so frequently, the end product specification does not ensure reliability. The length of performance is not really controlled by the end product specification. It's controlled by the manufacturing process. So we have to back up and say, how are you controlling your process so that you're sure that this piece and the piece that comes after it and the piece that's going to come 3 weeks from now are all going to be identical? We've got to work on eliminating the variation. Variation is the problem that we face in all quality areas, and minimizing that is important. And it's their systems that's going to bring about that change. You want to do that survey and become very familiar with their operation before you make a decision. You really, truly want to understand what's happening. Then what you need to do is to come back at least once a year and resurvey it to make sure that you're not having changes, that people are still doing the same thing. You've got to ensure that that's followed up. Once you've selected a candidate to work with, the next thing you want to do is to qualify that supplier. He's got a good system. He told you a good story. Mm-hmm. We've all seen salesmen that come in and tell you a good story, and everything looks good when you go look at the company, but when you talk about actual performance, you've got a whole different story. So now what we've did is we've narrowed it down to somebody we think's the right person from everything that we can see. Now we want to qualify that supplier. We want him to send in a sample of parts. Those sample of parts, you check 100% for every dimension, for everything related to it. You take parts out of that sample and you process them through your manufacturing process very carefully, doing a designer's experiment to determine how those parts will fit into your process. Will they work? Was there any interchangeability problems? And then, after you went through a functional test to evaluate how good that product performs, then you know if that product truly can be qualified and be used. And that provides you with the next level of confidence. From there, you move out of the qualification range and you start thinking about, I'm into the production activities. And in the production activities, what we need to do is to ensure that we're going to have continuous flow of parts. They can make one lot, that initial lot, very good. What's going to happen in the future? How is that going to run? Well, you still need receiving inspection to monitor initially, to be sure that things are going right. And so what I recommend is that you stay with receiving for the initial maybe 5 to 10 lots that are coming in to prove that they have the capabilities. And you'll back that up with statistical evidence that they'll be sending in with the lots that proves that the process is running constantly.
So you actually include them in your continuous improvement process. They're giving you the same kind of data that you're going to expect off your own work teams.
Yes. And what will actually happen is you develop this. I see many companies that actually transmit the data over telephone lines. And when you do that, you can look at the information, you look at the frequency distributions, and you accept the lot at the suppliers. So that's sort of the way you evolve out of receiving. To do that, you really have to provide the supplier with some education. You've got to really have them understand what you're doing as far as what do your prints mean, what do your specs mean. That means that you bring them in to see how you're going to use your parts. You involve them in the design. They become part of your whole operation. There's a close personal contact between them.
Of course, one of the most important things that we can do at Globe to develop this prevention-based quality system that we have in place is make sure that the raw materials that we receive from our suppliers are very consistent and very high quality all the time. Now, we broached this issue in 1985. Prior to then, we maybe never went to visit a supplier, or if we did, it would have just been very randomly and not any kind of pattern to it. And our quality control with suppliers was mainly 100% inspection of what they sent us, and then complaining and rejecting shipments that they would send us. And when you complained to a supplier, we would find that they would straighten up for a couple of deliveries maybe, and then kind of work their way right back into the same problem that they were having in the past. A good example would be undersize in the gravel that we buy. We buy this very expensive gravel from North Carolina, very high purity, that we get in here for silicon metal production. Costs a lot, obviously, to ship this all the way from North Carolina, so it's really low in impurities. We would receive the carloads here and then have to screen the gravel, screen it out, because there was so much small gravel that we had not ordered, undersized to us, that just wouldn't work well or furnace well for silicon metal production. The undersize, though, would be usable in ferrosilicon production. But of course, in ferrosilicon production, we're adding iron to the furnace. So using this very high purity North Carolina gravel for that purpose is akin to feeding filet mignon to your dog. You know, you really don't have to put this high purity gravel into the ferrosilicon furnace, because we could use very cheap Ohio gravel for that and not have to transport it so far. So we decided to work with all of our suppliers, not just that one, but all of them. And many of our suppliers have somewhat limited resources, where we are able to send our people out and have them trained, or maybe bring somebody in to help train our people. They really don't in many cases. They have very few employees, limited resources. So we decided that rather than just mandate to them, dictate that they have to go do something, we decided to go do it for them, to kind of take the training to them. And I think we're almost unique in this area, because we actually take a team of our own people, and this team might consist of the purchasing manager, the quality control manager, maybe the metallurgist, the senior metallurgist that we have here, maybe myself. We'll go charter a plane or something, fly down into the boondocks of North Carolina, or drive down to some coal mine in West Virginia, and sit down and actually train their hourly employees. Not just the salaried employees, but the hourly ones as well. And we start with taking real data that they use every day, maybe data that they report to us on a shipment by shipment basis. And we start translating that data into control charts based on this historical data, and show them that things are going out of control or trending out of control, and what could be done historically, what could have been done to have brought this back into control. And when we leave them, they have the beginnings of a chart. They have control limits, they have an average based on what they've been sending us, and then they can just go from that point and start maintaining the chart. And they know then that they have to do this, and there's a corrective action that has to be taken anytime something's gone out of control. In many cases, the suppliers were not even equipped to do the types of analyses that we needed to have done. So we actually supplied them with the equipment to do that at no charge, just so we could get the valid kind of data that we needed for them to collect. Because quite frankly, we didn't want to have to rely on 100% inspection here anymore. And certainly we didn't want to have to screen what they sent us to weed out the good material from the bad material. We wanted to get it just right every time, and we hope to evolve into just-in-time kind of delivery capability. But before we could do that, they had to be very consistent with the raw materials that they supplied us.
What can the work team out there do, Jim, to move this process along?
Well, the procurement team is an integral part in building that relationship. They have seminars with the suppliers. They make plant visits. They bring the suppliers into central locations to help teach them what statistical process control is, what teams are, how they work, how to build up a quality system within their area. They bring the suppliers to their location to show them how they use their parts.
You know, Jim, I can think of a lot of ways to enhance supplier relationships. It's just a matter of putting yourself in their shoes, experiencing things from where they are. What we'd like you to do in your teams right now is to really take this opportunity to brainstorm ways in which you can enhance your supplier relationships. We'd like you to look at all the ways in which things could go wrong, all the things that you do that make things not work, and then make decisions on how you can prevent those from ever happening again. Well, when you put yourself in your supplier's shoes, it's sure easy to discover how many things can go wrong. And that's the secret to this whole thing. It's to discover that on one hand, we're a customer, and on the other hand, we're a supplier too. And the issue here is that it's such a fragile relationship and so important.
You know, there's a Murphy's Law that says if it can go wrong, it will go wrong, and that will happen. And what we need to do is to work with our suppliers to remove the roadblocks. We have to work with them because we have a lot of impact on helping them remove those roadblocks. What we want to do is to really develop a very supportive attitude between the supplier and us. And with that, it's sort of like a father working with a son and teaching him how to fish. You know, it's a partnership working together because we all grow and we all get better. Now, between now and our next meeting, what I'd like to have you do is to take that list of problems that could occur at a supplier and look at what could be done when you go in to look at a supplier to check to ensure that they have procedures in place and have a record that will show that they will not have those problems and that they can guarantee to you that they will provide you with perfect products.